The 2010s were a very interesting decade for me. It was the first decade where I was a fully grown adult throughout the entirety of it. I know, I'm getting old. It was also the first decade where I started actively watching stuff more. I knew I loved animation, but I never really kept up with it quite as much as I did this past decade. A lot of that is thanks to making videos on YouTube, since I felt the need to keep on top of a lot of current media. So since the 2010s are over now, I'm going to be making a few lists on my favorite media of the decade. To start out, I'm going to talk about my favorite cartoons from the 2010s. I thought about doing just a top 10, but that doesn't seem like enough, because 10 years is a long time, and there's a lot that comes out. And thankfully, the 2010s was a great decade for animation, so I'm going to be doing a top 20 instead. First, a disclaimer. This is my list, so I may have different tastes compared to whatever you would put in yours. Also, I haven't seen every cartoon from the 2010s, so if you don't see it here, I might not have seen it. There's a lot of cartoons on this list, and I'm going to go pretty fast through each of them, so let's get started. Number 20. ScoobyDoo Mystery Incorporated. I only recently watched through this one. I had heard that it was widely regarded as one of the best iterations of Scooby-Doo, and man, they were right. It does feel a bit familiar with the Scooby-Doo formula, but it has this overarching story that gets more interesting as the show goes on, especially in the second season. The characters are also a lot more fun compared to other iterations, and I actually cared about them. Number 19. We Bare Bears. This show came out in the middle of the 2010s on Cartoon Network, and it's one that I don't really watch that much, but every time I do, it has this very comfy, familiar feeling. I don't know what it is, but I always describe We Bare Bears as my comfy show. Like, whenever I eat lunch or dinner, I'll put on an episode and I can easily enjoy it. All three of the lead characters are a lot of fun, too. Panda is probably my favorite with how awkward he can be. Number 18. The Amazing World of Gumball. Gumball is a show that I didn't think I would enjoy quite as much as I did. The first couple of seasons are alright in my opinion, but then it starts getting really funny from season 3 onward. It could consistently make me laugh, and it got really creative with its episodes. It does feel like it's all over the place sometimes, but that's possibly due to its style of combining different styles of animation into one show. I also love how they were able to make jokes or even entire episodes based on the voice actors for Gumball and Darwin changing every so often. Number 17. Steven Universe. I have some problems with Steven Universe, but that doesn't mean that I think it's bad. I can acknowledge that it did a lot right. At one point, I even had it above Adventure Time in the best cartoons that were currently airing. I think Steven Universe has a lot of good main characters and build-up throughout the show. When it's focused on those character moments and progressing the story, it's really good. Number 16. OKKO Let's Be Heroes. OKKO has to be one of the most reference-heavy shows I've seen, but the way they handle them can be a lot of fun. It's a show about having fun with the fact that it's a cartoon, and I can appreciate that. It does have a bit of an overarching story, but the heart of the show is in its humor and characters. I also love how everyone says sorry in the Canadian way by saying sorry. That can probably be frustrating to some, but I think it's hilarious. Number 15, Number 15, Star vs. the Forces of Evil. I have some very conflicted feelings about Star vs., especially with the last season, but I can't deny that the rest of the show was really good. I liked its world and ongoing story a lot more than Steven Universe. It's just unfortunate that it didn't really stick the landing for me in the end. I love Star as a character, and a lot of the side characters and villains are really fun. Number 14. Over the Garden Wall. I've only seen Over the Garden Wall a few times, but it's definitely one of the best miniseries and productions in general that Cartoon Network has ever put out. Back when it came out in 2014, I described it as a cartoon that feels like it was made by Mark Twain. And I know a lot of people have said it, but it just exudes the feeling of autumn. It's funny, it's cute, the story is really tight. Overall, it's just a really good watch. Number 13. Rick and Morty. Okay, yeah, I know, the Rick and Morty fandom is a bit much. And the merchandise is the most I've ever seen Adult Swim push out of any of their shows. So it feels very oversaturated. But the show is still really creative. I've said it before multiple times, but Rick and Morty is a great example for showing the limitless possibility of animation. Combining that with the sci-fi genre, it just gets really crazy and weird, and I love it. Number 12. Mao Mao, Heroes of Pure Heart. Once I started watching Mao Mao, I fell in love with it almost immediately. The characters are really fun. Mao Mao himself reminds me a lot of Lego Batman. Adorabat is adorable, of course. Badger Clops has some great moments, and the villains are a delight. The background music sometimes reminds me of the music from Shantae, of all things. I know it hasn't even had its season finished yet, but I really like it. Number 11. Castlevania. So far, I think this show is the best adaptation of a video game I've ever seen. Though the NES Castlevania games don't really have much to go on as far as story goes. The first season of the show is good, but the second season is even better. They made Dracula into such an interesting and sympathetic villain. You know he's evil, but you can understand why he feels a certain way. I think the acting really brings it home. If you're a fan of classical horror especially, you should give this show a watch. Number 10. Hilda. Hilda is one of the best original cartoons to come out of Netflix. Its fantasy setting feels very familiar yet fresh with its take on the genre. It has people living with the acknowledgement that monsters and mythical creatures exist. One of the best things about this show is the color palette. It's based on a graphic novel series, and it really captures that aesthetic. Seriously, this show is really pretty. Number 9. Infinity Train. At first, I thought this show was just going to be a miniseries, but I'm glad it's getting more episodes. I haven't finished the second season by the time of writing this video, but I'm still very interested in it. The first season was about the character Tulip being stuck on a train with different worlds within each of the cars. It's a really cool concept that I liked immediately. It resonated with me a lot more than I thought it would because Tulip's story is about going through divorced parents as an only child. So I can relate, since I was also around the same age when my parents separated. I also really love the music in the show. It has this synth vibe that's really fitting. Number 8. Primal. So you can probably tell by my name that I would love this show. I love dinosaurs and other prehistoric creatures, so yeah, duh, I like this a lot. It's not scientifically accurate at all, but who cares, it looks awesome. It's from Genndy Tartakovsky, and it's completely reliant on visual storytelling. There is no dialogue in this show. Everything is told through the characters' expressions and actions. The action is animated so well, and the designs of the creatures are awesome. There are only 5 episodes at the moment, but they have all been amazing. Number 7. Gravity Falls. This is one of the shows earlier in the decade that had the common trend of a humorous show with a slightly more serious overarching story. Out of all the shows on this list that have that kind of story, Gravity Falls probably has the best and tightest story. It set up its goal in the beginning and ended perfectly. It's only 40 episodes, but at that length, none of it feels wasted. The show isn't just about that though. It's also really funny. I love Grunkle Stan and Seuss. They have a lot of great quotes that crack me up, and Dipper and Mabel are great main characters. Number 6. Wander Over Yonder. This is probably one of the most underappreciated shows on this list. I know it definitely is compared to Craig McCracken's other shows, The Powerpuff Girls and Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends. I think maybe that's because the show is a bit harder to get into. Because at first, I didn't really like Wander Over Yonder that much. Wander is a very happy-go-lucky protagonist, and he has a very funny antagonist with Lord Hater. It's a very Bugs Bunny, Elmer Fudd kind of dynamic. The first season is good, but the second season is even better with the introduction of Lord Dominator. It's really unfortunate that it ended with only 2 seasons, but I still think it's one of the best cartoons from the past decade. Number 5. Regular Show. This is one of the shows responsible for Cartoon Network getting out of their slump in the early 2010s. It was really fresh and new and had protagonists that were in their 20s, so I could relate to them a lot more. I really loved the tagline that they had for the cartoon. Regular Show. It's anything but. It perfectly describes it. It is a bit formulaic with the episodes where something mundane turns into something really insane by the end, but it really works. It's a show I can rewatch multiple times and never be bored by it. It also explores relationships fairly well for a kids cartoon, something in common with a lot of my top 5 picks for this list. I don't really enjoy the last season as much as the rest of the show, but I still highly recommend it. Number 4. Bojack Horseman. Netflix really came into their own this past decade with their original shows and their animated content. Bojack Horseman was one of the first to be a hit with audiences. A lot of that has to do with its very quick-witted sense of humor, but also the hard topics it tackles such as anxiety, depression, addiction, and more. It seems to have found a right balance between serious and funny. The animation isn't the best compared to a lot of other shows on this list, but it makes up for that in its writing. At the time of writing this video, part 2 of the final season hasn't come out yet, but I'm hoping that it can finish strongly and that the characters can find happiness. Number 3. DuckTales. Out of all the shows on this list, this was the most surprising for me. I never watched that many Disney afternoon shows growing up, so I didn't have that much of an attachment to the original DuckTales. However, I think that this cartoon is the best reboot I've ever seen. It took familiar characters and updated them for the better. Huey, Dewey, and Louie are all actually different, Webby is a much better character, and the villains are all really fun and interesting. Even the new characters that were introduced are immediately likable, all while having the show be somewhat episodic, but still carrying an overarching plot that just gets more interesting as the show goes on. It's really good. Possibly the best cartoon of the decade. But I do have my biases. Number 2. Adventure Time. I think a lot of you knew this was going to be close to the top. I love Adventure Time. It's a show that I believe is responsible for kicking off a lot of this decade's direction when it comes to TV animation. It has a really fun sandbox of a setting with the Land of Oo that is very Dungeons & Dragons inspired. Finn and Jake are great likable protagonists that I just want to hang out with. All the side characters are fun and interesting. It has great atmospheric art, great music for both the background score and the songs. It's very episodic but also has story and lore heavy episodes. And like I said, it started off trends in cartoons in general for the decade. You should watch my video about that if you haven't already. I know some people weren't that happy with the finale, but I thought it was good. I've talked a lot about Adventure Time in the past, and I definitely will more in the future. I literally jumped out of my seat when I found out we were getting more on HBO Max with the specials, so I'm very excited about that. Alright, before I get to number 1, here are some honorable mentions that I'll list off. The Loud House, one of the best original cartoons from Nickelodeon this decade. Barbie: Life in the Dream House. You might laugh, but this show is hilarious. Symbionic Titan. I know a lot of people love this, but I just really need to rewatch it. The Avengers: Earth's Mightiest Heroes. Probably the best Marvel cartoon that features the Avengers. Dan Versus. Probably one of the most underappreciated cartoons to come from the Hub. Tuca and Birdie. Only had one season, I would have liked more. Summer Camp Island. You're cute, but not cute enough. The Ricky Gervais Show. Making animations of podcasts before YouTubers did it. And the Mickey Mouse shorts. These shorts are just really good. I'm sure there are others that I really like that I would have had as honorable mentions, but I just can't think of them right now. So with those out of the way, let's go to number 1. Now, if you've been following me for a long time, and I mean a long time, you may have noticed that there's a certain cartoon that hasn't shown up yet. So you've probably guessed what my number 1 cartoon of the decade is. It's a show that pretty much defined my decade. It got me into making YouTube videos more regularly, helped me find friends that I have become very close with, and let me find happiness in a time that I didn't really know where I was going in life. That show being, of course, My Little Pony: Friendship is Magic. I gotta be honest with you guys, I didn't think this would end up being my number 1. But there's something very important that this show did that no cartoon on this list was able to do. It made me cry with its finale. Not like just tearing up, which I did a bit during Adventure Time's finale, but MLP's finale made me cry. Once that book closed, it hit me that it was over and all that the show gave to me was finally done. It impacted my life more than any other cartoon on this list, and that's got to count for something. When I started making videos, I never thought I would be going to so many conventions and meeting people and friends throughout the decade thanks to this cartoon about ponies. The friends I've made I still talk to on a daily basis and do podcasts with. And the finale had such a great ending lesson about how friendships transcend time, and that even though the show is over, the magic of friendship still grows. Sounds corny, but it's true. MLP may have had some not-so-good episodes throughout the series, mainly Season 6, but it's mostly been a pretty fun and enjoyable show to me. The characters, the stories, the animation, and the music have all felt like they have either improved or kept at a pretty consistent quality throughout the series. Which some may say is debatable, but after rewatching the series last year with someone who hadn't seen the show at all, I think it's safe to say that MLP is one of my favorite cartoons of all time, and my favorite cartoon from the 2010s. And as my friend Hirasashi once said, "It may not be the best show, but it gave me a family." And that's it. Let me know what your favorite cartoons of the 2010s were. And I'll see you next time when I talk about my favorite animated movies of the decade. Bye! And a big thanks to my top patrons on Patreon and my top members on YouTube. So thank you to DJ Skywalker, Random Bun, Ryan Walterson, Sean Model, Strumpet, Deli18, EditMan RGG2, and Malik Webster. Thank you so much for your support.